This is Wild About Liberty, where the community joins together. Now here's your host, Terry Wild.
Thank you for tuning into the program. You're going to love our two guests today. These men have done a lot concerning the political side of things, but they also have a profound knowledge of the Bible. So we're going to be talking about God and politics. How do they mix? How do they blend? And so start off with you, Neil Mammon. What a blessing you have been to me. And we go back now quite a ways when you first started with Values Advocacy Group. Tell us about that.
Well, I was the president. Actually, I was on the board of the Values Advocacy Council, which is an organization that was formed to bring pastors into the fold when it comes to engaging with laws and politics and politicians. And I was on the board there for, I think, 5 or 6 years. And then the president retired, Larry Pegram. You might have had him. You know him well, Larry. Terry. And then when he retired, they kind of roped me into being president, and so that's where Terry and I engaged. We had a good run there. We did a lot of stuff there in San Jose, and basically getting our goal is to get Christians involved in politics, not only just pastors but also Christians. I got blacklisted as a result of my fame or infamy, I guess.
Yeah, I was just going to say you paid a heavy price for your stand and commitment there. You know, Silicon Valley is a tough place to be doing what you were doing.
Yeah, and you know, I was naive enough to think, because I've started 4 companies, I've hired hundreds of people, and I never asked about their politics. I only asked, are they going to perform at work? Are they honest and have good character? And will they be a part of the team? We didn't want any prima donnas. And those are about the 3 questions that I was looking for. And I figured, so what if I disagree politically with someone? At least we can work together and build new products. And apparently Silicon Valley is not that anymore. Now they first want to know if you're woke. And if you are not woke, then you don't get hired. So even if you're a good engineer, and as we found, it's not really working well for Silicon Valley. A lot of companies have been having problems because now they're hiring for a standard of wokeness and not a standard of excellence. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, so I'm here in Idaho now. And we are, well, I think it's a God thing in many ways, because the moment I got here, we ended up being involved deeply in Idaho. Most people think Idaho is a red state. Well, it's not a big deal, but it turns out Idaho is really a rhino state, because you can't run unless you have an R next to your name. So all the Democrats, all the liberals, all the progressives put an R next to their name, and they just run like they were Republicans. And so we've been spending a lot of time weeding out a majority, something like 60 to 70% of our state legislature and school boards and all that are progressives. They're just plain progressives. I wouldn't even say rhinos, but progressives with an R in front of their name. So we've been fighting that here. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well, Lawrence, you've been busy in the San Bernardino County area, getting ready to run for school board, but you've written a number of books, and Neil, you've written some books. And I'm writing a book, so we can talk a little bit about that, and just give us a greeting, Lawrence, and tell people who you are.
Well, like Neil, I've been working with a lot of Christian and patriot groups for quite some time now, a couple decades or so. I used to call it crossover, but it really isn't. You were talking about, the connection between God and politics. Well, if God created everything and he created politics, he created government as well, and it all should be working his way. And I think, I don't want to speak for Neil, but I know for myself that it hasn't been working that way for quite some time. And I'm just happy to work with other people who see that as a problem and want to try to fix it.
Well, where I want to try and go today with this program is, we live in a country that has its roots and origin in religious freedom, and people came here because they wanted to be able to live and to serve God according to their conscience. And so God and politics has been a part of the American history. It's part of the American dream. And so you really can't separate it, although people are trying to do that now, and the separation of church and state, on and on. So I don't think there's two more people other than you two that I think are qualified to talk about this. Neil, you would consider yourself a Christian apologist, right?
Yeah, I teach apologetics. In fact, that's my passion. I kind of got dragged into politics because of the failure, sadly not failure, of the pastoral staff who have not been involved in politics, who haven't seen it as their purpose or their priority, thinking that they can blindly just preach the gospel and ignore the conditions that allow them to preach the gospel.
Well, you know, I'm very involved every day, this morning and every other morning, with people and groups here in Fresno County, and we're taking on the school boards, the city councils, the county supervisors, all of these issues. We're working with people that are trying to support and defend parental rights in schools. So it's very political. And yet, the government is said to be on the shoulders of Jesus Christ. He carries the government. And God ordained civil government. And, you know, Romans comes to mind right away. You obey the authorities that God has ordained. And so there's that whole kind of issue there that is very controversial, actually. But God formed civil government to restrain evil. And I think the question I would throw out and for discussion first is, you don't know much if you don't know Jesus Christ. He came to reveal himself. He came to express and to demonstrate that part of him who is both God and fully human. And we have to deal with that in everything we do. There's a human side to life. We live in a natural world, a natural order, natural law, but yet there's a spiritual dimension. How do you see that, Neil, working in terms of how people should view their role in civil government?
Well, I think if you look at God's laws, all God's laws were given to protect us, right? There's not a single law in the Ten Commandments or any of the other laws he gave us that were for his benefit. They're all for our benefit. I mean, when even the law against do not blaspheme, God's not up there going, oh no, you hurt my feelings. No, what he's saying is that you have, by blaspheming me, you've broken up that relationship between us. You need that relationship for you to be healthy.
Good point.
And if you look at the Ten Commandments are broken up into two: love the Lord your God, which is the first four, and then love your neighbor as yourself, which is the last six, right? I mean, you can break up some of them depending on if you're Catholic or Protestant, how you break them up. But we can clearly see there's love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And why do we love your neighbor as yourself? Because God wants us. It's just like my kids. I don't want my kids to fight. I want them to be healthy. I want them to be happy. So I'm going to give them all the training, all the teaching I can for them to be happy. Now, imagine my kids now disobey my word. Let's say I'm gone for a few hours and they start doing everything the opposite of what I say. Who's going to suffer? Am I going to suffer? Yeah, long term, because my kids suffer, but they're going to suffer and they're going to suffer more. So whenever we realize that God's laws are given to protect us, what happens when our nation's laws violate God's laws? Well, guess what? People are going to suffer. But who's going to suffer first? It's not going to be the rich. It's not going to be the powerful. It's going to be the poor. It's going to be the disenfranchised. It's going to be the widows and the orphans. It's going to be the very people that God tells us to take care of. So how heartless and cruel and wicked can we be to then say, oh, the nation's laws are none of our business? And then here's the spiritual aspect of that. If there is an evil one, and we all believe, if you're a Christian, you've got to believe there's an evil one. There is the devil. Now, he doesn't have any power that God doesn't allow him to have, but God has allowed him the power to disrupt and hurt people and hurt us. And so as a result of that, do we think that those people who hate God's law, that do not believe in the Ten Commandments, do not believe in all those laws, do not believe in the Bible, do not know the Creator, are going to want to legislate laws that agree with his principles on their own, especially if there's an evil one that is convincing them to do the opposite.
Exactly.
So how can you fathom that evil people will not try to destroy things? And then what is the solution for evil people doing bad things? It's good people doing good things and protecting them. And where are the pastors? Where's the church? Where are the Christians? That's exactly where we should be.
Exactly. How do you see it, Lawrence?
Well, you said something a little while ago, Terry, that I think might cause some of the non-believers or even some of the believers to roll their eyes, but it is critical for our understanding of how to proceed in these troubled times. You said, you don't know much if you don't know Jesus Christ. Well, the fact of the matter is Christianity really isn't a religion. It's a reality. And history shows that those people who deny or defy reality are in for a lot of trouble. So whether you believe it or not, it's true. We know it's true. The founders of this nation knew it was true, and they based everything on that knowledge of that truth. And the United States just took off like unlike any other nation in history, became the most powerful, the wealthiest, the noblest nation ever. So we have to face that reality that this is true, and then base everything that we do upon that foundation, that strong foundation. Neil also mentioned about Satan's power. And this is another thing we need to be very aware of, especially all of those pastors and other religious misleaders who tell us we need to stay out of politics. Politics is really about the accumulation, the distribution, and the use of power. And as Neil said, Satan doesn't have any power other than what God allows him. Well, where are the greatest concentrations of power throughout history? Capitals, where governments are based. That's where the human, the gathering point of human power is. So if Satan needs all the power he can get, where do you think he's going to go? He's going to go to the political realm. And if we believers, if we Christians stay out of politics, guess who wins? It's not us.
That's right. Well, you know, there's a couple of things I'd like to try and unfold. The idea that we're on this earth by ourselves, we're working out our lives and developing our technologies and all of the aspects of our life, and we're doing that on our own by ourselves, is crazy. We wouldn't last, I don't think we'd last a month if that were true. God put us here with a very specific purpose in mind. And he has an agenda. He has a plan. And he is operating that plan every minute of every day, all the time. So he's running the world, with the exception that he gave us a free will, and that gives us some latitude. We can opt out and we can see, do different things that we would want to do. But God's plan is our responsibility to be a witness and a testimony to the world. We're here to tell people God has a plan and you need to follow it. And if you follow it, then there's going to be benefits. If you don't follow it, there's going to be serious problems. So the idea in my mind is God is already in charge. We don't have to put him in charge. He's in charge. And so he moves the hands of the leaders to and fro, and he's allowed the United States to flourish in the midst of other countries that haven't flourished or flourished less than we have. How do you see that, Neil?
Well, I mean, again, if you look at what America has done, it formalized the very concept of inalienable rights. No nation had ever done that before. And so what happened with that formalizing is that people were free from tyranny. They were free from a lot of things. Now, it's true that since then, and we weren't completely free because we still had slavery, but the concepts were enshrined there. And this has allowed our nation to prosper amazingly well. In fact, there's a whole bunch of principles there. One of them is the government was there only to protect our rights. Two, the government was not there to provide us with goods and services. But we've kind of mutated, spoiled that. But if you look at why we exploded into, here we were a tiny fledgling nation, a previous colony of the greatest nation in the world, and no other colony has done as well as we have. Why did we do so well? Because of our independence and freedom of speech, freedom of rights. I mean, all these rights, it's inalienable rights. Now, here's what's important, and here's why I think it's very important that we understand the connection between Christianity. I was born in Ghana, grew up in Sudan, Ethiopia, Yemen. My parents are from India, been all over the world. And nowhere, in fact, just recently I was in Nigeria and Israel, and I was talking to people, and I said, where do you get your rights from? And they all, including the Jews, thought that their rights came from the government.
Wow.
Okay. Now, if you talk to some of the educated Jews, they'll say, no, our rights come from God. But if you look at the Jewish constitution, they don't really have a constitution. They have a Declaration of Independence. It says their rights come from the government. It's natural. It's the common law. They get their rights from common law. We get our rights from natural law. Natural law is the laws of nature, and nature's God, right? They get their rights from common law. Now, here's where this is so important, because I said I've traveled all over the world, and the reason I said that is because I lived amongst Muslims. My Indian heritage has Hinduism in it, and I've lived around Zoroastrians, Buddhists, name it all. I've had it. And I've read all the, as you mentioned, I'm an apologist, so I read all the religions and I study all the religions. I'm a sort of expert in religions. Not a single religion that I have ever run into has a God that says all men are made equal, except for Christianity.
Wow.
So you take away the Christian Bible, you don't have unalienable rights. You take away the Christian Bible, you don't have freedom of speech. You take away the Christian Bible, you don't have the freedom to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You don't have the right to protect yourself. You don't have the right to a trial by jury. You don't have any of that unless the government gives it to you. And let me tell you, in all the countries I've been to, the government doesn't always give you what they want. And if they don't like it, they take it back.
Now, when you say government, you're talking about a group of human beings, a group of people that meet around a table and they say, okay, this is what we think is good for everybody. And so you're saying I'm going to put my whole life and future in the hands of a committee.
Yeah, it's
that's
like
really
the HOA.
And so, Lawrence, I'm curious on your take. France came right behind us, and their motto was liberty, fraternity, equality.
Right.
And they formed their government, and they formed their constitution around that idea. But they left God out. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's exactly why their revolution took a very different path from ours. God wasn't part of that. They had this other triad of qualities that they wanted to emphasize, but they forgot who gave you all of these things. They forgot who gave you the fraternity, the equality, and everything else. It's God. And we acknowledge that in our Declaration of Independence, there is a very simple but profound philosophy of government that almost everybody misses. And it's entirely different from the philosophy of government that's led almost every other nation that has ever existed. And we find, and it's hiding in plain sight in the second paragraph of the Declaration. And much of it is found in the most memorized part of the Declaration. So it's kind of strange that we miss it. But as you recall, it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And unfortunately, most people end their memory work there. If they just went 10 words further, they would see that this is a profound philosophy of government and not a collection of political platitudes. Those 10 words say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So I urge people, read those passages backwards, and it becomes free of all the flowery language of the 18th century. And it says, governments are instituted among men to secure these rights that were endowed by their Creator. In other words, the rightful role of government is to do the work of God. The political work of God is to secure these.
I like that.
And the holy trinity of rights were life, property, and liberty. And the United States was the first one to put that all together on a foundation of God, and it just ignited. And the founders understood that. I mean, I could go into all kinds of things that the founders said and did, but they believed that God was their guide. And in Washington's first inaugural address, he pointed out that it's impossible to look back on all the events that have led us here to this event, April 30th, 1789, when I am being sworn in as the president of this democratic republic. It is impossible to look back on those events and not see the hand of God. And then he went on, now that's looking backwards, and then he looked forward. He said, the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained. In other words, if we don't do it God's way, we can just forget it. It's not going to work.
Well, you know, that that whole idea where in Romans it said that in the past God spoke through prophets, he spoke through priests, he spoke through kings, he spoke through all kinds of different ways, but it says in the last days, in these days, God is speaking through Son. It isn't even the Son, it's Son. And so God's speech to us is through Jesus Christ. His revelation of who he is through Jesus Christ. If you want to know God, you can only know him through Jesus Christ. There's no other possible way to know God. It's through Jesus Christ. And in Colossians, it says that Jesus is the fullness of the Godhead bodily. So there's, well, I might want to go with this. I don't want to get deep into a lot of the theological aspects, but, you know, we were made in God's image and likeness. And that image and likeness is Jesus Christ. He's the representative man. Everything he is who God created Adam to be in terms of attributes. And we're not divine, only God is divine, but as created beings, we're made in that image. And that's the image we're striving to make us into now. In other words, we're here to be conformed to the image of Christ. And so God's speech is through knowing Christ. Without knowing Christ, you just don't understand. You can't develop a relationship with God. What are your thoughts, Neil?
Well, I mean, coming back to the reality is that, look, if you love the Lord and you are a legislator, you're going to legislate according to the laws of nature and nature's God. If you hate God or don't believe he exists, you're going to legislate contrary to that. I mean, it's just as simple as that. You might have some common sense here or there, hopefully, but you're going to be influenced by the evil one. So the reality is that God has set up this whole system of government for the benefit of his people so that they can get along well. In fact, if you go back to Exodus 18, talks about the foundation of the republic and all that. So that extends now to your private life. So, you know, you've got the government, we've got your private life, how do you want to dictate how do you want to run your life? Do you want to run your life according to what you think is good? Or do you think you want to run your life about the way that really is good? And so what I tell people is that there are three ways we can learn God's laws. The first one is the most powerful way. This is the supernatural revelation of God, where God has actually given it to us. And that's called the Bible, right? That's the Torah. That's the laws of God in the Bible. And that's the way to salvation in the gospel, right? So that's the first way. The second way is the conscience laws. And that is where we kind of in our heart, we kind of go, well, I think this is wrong, or I think this is right. And this is what we see a lot of people interpret as the moral law, ethics. And you see people talk about morality and ethics, and they kind of say, well, that feeling inside what this is right or this is wrong. But that conscience law is easily persuaded by peers and by the masses. Right. And then the last one is what I call the laws of nature, not the revealed law, the experience law. So when I teach my kids this, when they were younger, I thought there are three ways. Dad can tell you don't run across the street. That's the revealed law. The second way is you look at the cars coming back and forth and you say, that looks dangerous. I don't think I'm going to run across the street. The third way you figure it out is you actually run across the street, you get hit. Hopefully you don't die. You just have some serious injuries, but you survive, and you go, I ain't going to do that anymore, right? It's the school of hard knocks. And so what we've been doing the last 50, 60 years, we've abandoned the revealed law. We've we've mutated our conscience law. It's been our consciences have been soiled, and so now we're back to the school of hard knocks. We're learning all the bad things. We're learning why divorce is bad. We're learning why homosexuality is bad. We're learning why transgender is bad. And we haven't, because as we're seeing the fallout from each one of these things, we're going to realize that God was right all along, and people will look back in history and go, man, were they stupid. Just like we look back in history now and go, man, were they stupid not to be washing their hands. They, in the 1800s, they didn't know that bacteria existed, and they thought it was stupid that the Bible said you had to wash your hands after you touched a dead person. And then later in the 1800s, Pasteur shows up and he goes, oh, look, there's something called bacteria.
Exactly.
Oh, well, the Bible was right. They didn't written it 5,000 years ago. It took us 4,000 years to figure it out because we were not ready to follow God's laws, and we had to learn it through the school of hard knocks. And that's exactly what's going to happen now, both in the law and in salvation issues. If you don't listen to Christ, if you don't believe in Jesus Christ, if you don't listen to the Bible, the revealed law, you're going to learn the hard way.
Well, Lawrence, our first obligation as Christians is to be a witness and a testimony and to go into the world and make disciples. And so if you take that as the prerequisite for everyone has to do that, we're all engaged in carrying out that, instruction, then politics isn't a separate thing from religion or our faith, our trust and belief in Jesus Christ. It's the catalyst for why we are in politics, because we're here to make disciples. We're here to convince people or try to convince people to live a certain way. And so when they say to us, well, just keep your religion to yourself, don't drag it into the public arena and push your morality on other people, how does that work? How do you see that?
Well, if we're not going to take the truth into politics with us, then obviously politics is going to be based on lies. And if we base anything on lies, that just doesn't work out too well. You mentioned about making disciples, and a critical point here is, in the 28th chapter of Matthew, just before Jesus was ready to lift off, he gave what I see, with my military background, I see as an operation order to the disciples and to everybody else. He said, paragraph 2 of the 5-paragraph order that all NATO nations use is mission statement. Well, Jesus gave that to us. He says, go and make disciples of all the nations. Now, he didn't say go and make believers. He said disciples, and that's a higher level. He set the bar pretty high. These are not only people who believe, but people who are acting on that belief, who are living it. And so much of our life is affected by what goes on in government that if we don't take that belief into government with us, it is just not going to work out too well. And that's not a prediction, it's an observation. Look at what's been going on for decades now. I would say probably 1947 was a watershed time for us, and that's when the Supreme Court in Everson versus the Board of Education institutionalized as a constitutional principle the notion of separation of church and state. It's not a constitutional principle. It's not it's not a way to preserve the Constitution. It's a way to pervert the Constitution.
Exactly.
Founders never intended to leave God out of government. They did intend to keep government out of religion and to keep the two kind of separate, the two institutions apart, because they knew their history, and they knew that throughout history, the two greatest abusers of human rights were big government and big religion. So they wanted to keep them from coming together and beating up on us after all they went through to create this beautiful republic. But they knew that this beautiful republic would turn ugly if we didn't keep God at the heart of everything that we did. And that whole erroneous notion of separation of church and state, and I could go on that for hours. In fact, I have, because I've classes on that. It is just a perversion of the Constitution, and it leads to nowhere but trouble. And that's exactly what we've seen since 1947.
What a good point.
Every area of our life.
That's a great point. I really like the way you said that. Well, Neil, you're doing a lot of things now that I'd like to hear how your life has changed from Silicon Valley and being so immersed in that counterculture. And now you're in Boise, Idaho. You mentioned the rhinos. I find it really, really difficult here to try and organize and try and create a sense of unity and direction, having to deal with people that turn out to be opposite of our values, our Christian Judeo values, and still call themselves a Republican. And I'm getting pushback here. How's it working for you now in Boise?
Well, it's an uphill battle, but the good thing is so many of us Californians have fled California and have come here, and they're all not going to put up with it. They said, that the prevailing attitude amongst the Californian exilees or the refugees, if you will, we're political and religious refugees from California, is we're not going to let Idaho become California. So we've seen a lot of interest, a lot of movement here. It's a growing movement. I don't know that we can say we're successful yet, but I've seen a lot of good signs. I've seen a lot of people come to the table. A lot of, I've mentioned a few times before, we had a local school try to bring in, allow boys into the girls' restrooms, and 1,000, we put out a call and 1,000 parents showed up. Right?
Nice.
And it was such a big deal that the legislature then passed a law about a few months later banning all boys and all girls' restrooms. You can only go into the restroom of your biological
nice
DNA.
Wow.
Based on your birth certificate, right? So
right.
So they killed that, but then there was another bill that would have banned all pornography in libraries, right? And the rhinos managed to keep that from going to a vote, right? So there's stuff like that where they're all things. Oh, we don't want censorship. It was never a question of censorship. It was a question of just put those books in an area where kids can't access it and only parents and adults can, right? And then one of their excuses: what if your mom sent you to the library to pick up that book? Yeah, right.
Let me see the note.
I'm going to send a 13-year-old to go pick up a book on sex that I wouldn't want him to see. Yeah, that's right. That's not going to happen. I'll go myself if that's the case.
Yeah.
So we've got a bunch of that going on, and we've been fighting it. And but we've identified who those people are. And the good thing is that, as I said, we're getting more and more people involved and looking at that. What's interesting is that for years, people in Idaho thought, well, we're a red state, and they just didn't care about it because they figured, well, we're a red state. Everybody's Republican here. We're okay. And so we've been waking up the local Idahoans, which is part of the battle. Is a lot of the local Idahoans are like, wait, that guy's a Republican. I voted for him every year. No. I haven't looked at what he's.
Way to
you
go.
Vote for him, and then you
That's
don't
awesome.
follow up on what he's doing, right?
Nice. Well, Lawrence, you're getting ready to run for school board. You're probably going to be out there right after Christmas and the first of the year. Tell us about how that's going, but also what's the nature, what's the character of the people in your area of San Bernardino? How are they looking at things? Is there a positive feeling? Does it look optimistic? How does it look?
I think it looks very optimistic, and I've already been out doing some canvassing, knocked on a lot of doors and talked to a lot of people. And they are very concerned about these issues. I think this is an area where the wokesters, the left, whatever you want to call them, the regressives, have made a critical mistake. They've made a huge strategic blunder. And when you think about it, they really had to. See, sooner or later, history shows that sooner or later, evil always comes after the children.
Right.
And the evil in our country has been doing that kind of on the sly. They've been degrading our schools, debauching our morals for a long time now, but now they're getting very focused about it. And like some things that Neil mentioned here about the pornography, in student libraries, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. I've seen some of this. It's disgusting. And like I said, I was in the Marine Corps. I mean, that kind of stuff is everywhere in the Marine Corps. I've seen all kinds of things. If something disgusts a Marine, it better not be in a child's library.
Yeah, exactly.
There be a standard right there. But anyway, there's a great deal, I think, of the mistake that I think that the left has made in pushing all of the everything from drag queens to pornography and their sex ed is being very graphic, is that they've come against the force of nature. And you don't go against forces of nature and expect to win. And what they've done is they've come after the mama bears and the papa bears out there. The parental instinct is one of the most powerful instincts there is. And you know what? You don't mess with the cubs when mama bear's around.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm seeing a lot of that now and knocking on doors and talking with people. They're very concerned about this type of thing. So there's a lot of that. So I think this is a golden opportunity for us, what everyone calls the white hats, in the old cowboy movies, the good guys always wear the white hats. So us white hats, this is a golden opportunity for us to seize on this issue and say we're going to protect the kids. In fact, just a little over a week ago, I was knocked on one door, and I always end up saying, well, here's a flyer. You can look it over at your leisure. Or if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them now. And he says, how do you feel about banning books? Well, I knew right away which side he was on, because that is one of the key words, banning books. So we had a conversation, and it was obvious. He says, well, I don't believe in that. I said, well, I don't believe in banning books either, but there are certain books that just are not appropriate in certain circumstances and certainly for certain ages. And we happened to be standing right across the street from a very large church. And I said, look, I said, I'm a Christian. I believe in the Bible, but I wouldn't use the Bible as a reader for first graders. It's just too advanced for them. It's not appropriate. Certain things are not appropriate. And I said, it's been shown that this kind of pornography is damaging. I mean, I have a friend who's older than I am, and he struggles still every day with this addiction to pornography. Look what it did to him.
Sure.
So what we're going to, and he was an adult. What about our kids if we start subjecting them to this trash at the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? What's it going to do to them, and how's it going to affect their life? And so I said, look, I'm not a politician, and I'm not going to schmooze you. If I am elected, I'm going to do everything I can to take those books out of those libraries because it's the kids. And he stopped. He said, well, I can agree with that. I don't want it to hurt the kids. And it kind of turned him around. So if we just get into the debate and don't rely on all of the ad hominem arguments, the name calling, fancy word for name calling, well, you're a this, no, you're a that, you're a thisophobe, and you're that-ophobe. If we just get in and talk about the issues, pretty soon we find that we can agree about stuff. Like this guy who was so concerned about what he saw as being banning of books. After we talked a little bit, he said, well, okay, yeah, this stuff is harmful for children, and I can see where you're coming from now, and I can agree with that. So I think there's a lot of potential here to build on this agreement, this mass agreement that we have about protecting our kids.
Well, we're down to less than a year for 2024. Donald Trump is doing pretty good. I mean, he's under all this crazy, I would call it persecution, and yet he's coming out smelling like a rose, and he's popular. People want change. People are tired of the Biden craziness. I think there's reason to be optimistic, and I think we could probably flip California, in my mind, Neil, by 2026 with the gubernatorial race, if this momentum continues, and if we can organize ourselves. It's so hard to get the people that are needed to unite and to walk in the same direction together. And, Lawrence, that whole school initiative bill or that amendment can give us the focus we need, I think, because it is about the schools, it is about the kids, but it's much bigger than that. It is a opportunity to get everybody on board and get rid of the governor, get rid of the Secretary of State in California, and put some sane people in there. So tell us a little bit about how you see that, especially with Dale Brune, who's spearheading it. And do you see that vision here of 2026 based on getting behind that initiative?
Yes, I think the initiative can play a big role in that. And for those who aren't familiar with what we're talking about here, this is the school choice initiative. The idea is to let parents have access to a pot of money, their share of this pot of money that exists in the California educational system.
$17,000 a year.
Yeah, it varies from year to year because it's based on a percentage, but it ranges from about $12,000 to $14,000 per year. So if you say your kids are in a public school and you don't like what's going on there, you can opt for that money and you can spend it on a private school, whether it's a religious school or some other school, or you can use it for some homeschool expenses. The idea here is that it would eliminate the monopoly that we are close to in our public school system. I mean, and monopolies almost never work out. We talk about, freedom. We started this conversation talking about liberty. Liberty is a contrary notion to monopolies. And monopolies say, here, you have one choice, take it or leave it. And school choice would provide an option, a range of options for people. It's not anti-public schools. But what we've seen, and this movement has been very popular. I don't know what the number's up to now, but I know we were very close to about 40 states. In other words, about 80% of the union has some form of school choice. So we've had a chance to explore it and see how it works. And what we've seen is that even the public schools do a better job, in terms of academic standards and in other areas, because now they have to compete. And we even see that public school teachers tend to make more money because the schools have to stop wasting money on all of this, diversity, equity, inclusion nonsense, and they have to start investing in education.
Making it free enterprise, exactly.
And so that means they need to get and keep good teachers. And so salaries have gone up. So public school unions tend to be opposed to any kind of school choice initiative, but it's really one of their best friends in terms of the teachers.
That's right.
It's not one of their best friends in terms of their desire to indoctrinate the kids. So it's really a great movement. And yeah, we can use that to build on. And I think you were talking about flipping California. I crunched some numbers a few years back, and I basically looked at two groups that are known for being single issue voters. In other words, if you're not right on this issue, I'm not voting for you no matter what else. And I looked at pro-life and Second Amendment supporters. And what I found was if we can get about 2/3 of them to vote, just those two groups alone, we could secure as many votes as Jerry Brown got the last time he ran for governor.
Nice.
So yes, it's very possible.
Well, Neil, we're down to just about 2 minutes, and I knew this hour was going to fly by, and I've enjoyed every minute of it, and being with you guys is such a pleasure. But why don't you close this out, Neil, and tell our listeners what your thoughts are, especially, we're talking about flipping California. There's some optimism here. People are starting to feel better and hopeful. What are your thoughts? We got 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Well, California is a tough cookie to crack. Part of the problem is that, there is a fair amount of corruption. We got to rein in any sort of voter fraud and ballot harvesting and all that stuff. So one of the things they have to do is we have to do the ballot harvesting. The churches have to get involved in the ballot harvesting. And I know there are churches in San Diego that were doing that. It's legal in California. We've got to do it. We have more power than they do because more of us meet together.
Exactly.
Every day of the week. I was just telling the pastors here that The politicians should be afraid of the pastors, and they're not, because the pastors haven't realized what power it is. If a politician wants to get a message out to 10 million people, he has to advertise, he has to spend millions of dollars, he has to send flyers, he has to send people door to door. If I have a group of pastors who are working with me, like 10 or 20,000 pastors, and I want them to get a message, I just need to send out a message to those 10 or 20,000 pastors, and they will reach 10 million people for me if they have somewhere like 500 people per audience. And we can do that every week, every day, not only Sundays, but also on Wednesdays in most cases. We have more power than they do. We can mobilize more people than they do.
That is music to my ears. I mean,
Well,
that.
the sad thing is that we got to get those 20,000 pastors to get on board, right?
Well,
That's
if we
the
had
effort that we
another,
have to be focusing on.
if we had another segment, I'd love to go into that. And we got to go. But thanks for tuning in, Neil Mammon, Lawrence Hebron. What a pleasure. God bless you. And thanks for tuning in to Wild About Liberty. God bless.
Thank you for listening to Wild About Liberty with Terry Wild, only on KXEX 1550.